Tonight, you'll be dozing off from the back seat of your parents' car, softly cradled by the gentle hum of the engine as it travels homeward late at night along a country highway. Imagine you are sitting in the back seat with your head nestled into a cozy pillow propped against the window. You are gazing out at the moonlit countryside, and on your face is a soft and secret smile. It's late Friday night after playing in the pep band at your brother's basketball game far from home. Your kid's sister has nodded off already. She's laying across the wide seat with her head resting softly in your lap. You are tired too after a long week of high school and homework, but you're also full of wonder, and that smile on your face is perfectly concealed in the shadows, only illuminated sporadically by the flickering flashes of light cast from the headlights of oncoming cars. You rest your forehead against the cool glass of the window. Every now and then, a distant farmhouse light appears, towering like a lighthouse in the dark, casting bright beams across the endless, waterless ocean of a prairie. Now, slowly we'll begin to relax. First, with eyes closed, just become aware of your breathing, feeling your chest gently rise and fall again. Next, we'll try taking a few deeper breaths, filling our lungs with air, holding it, and then gently exhaling and letting it all go. Ready? Inhale deeply, hold for 3, 2, 1, and then exhale. One more time. Breathe in deeply, hold for 3, 2, 1, and then exhale. And try thinking to yourself, as I sit here in the back seat, I can feel gravity's pull tugging me gently back towards Earth. With every exhale, I can feel the weight of the day slipping away. I can feel my feet, my ankles, calves, knees, and my legs, each part of me relaxing deeper and becoming heavier and more relaxed. Up in the front seat, your parents recap and relive the big game. They talk of jump shots and fouls, rebounds and timeouts. You close your eyes, but when you picture the crowded gymnasium, you remember something much sweeter than basketball. Your mind drifts back, but now the memory of the night is soothing and hypnotic, somehow quieter, as if it all played out in slow motion. Sneakers squeaking on the hardwood floor, cheers blasting out from spirit sections choreographed by cheerleaders and mascots. The aroma of popcorn and hot dogs snaking its way from concessions all the way through the hot air, above the teams and players and referees, and then high into the packed stands where you and the band played and cheered and sang. You quietly reflect on how unexpected your first love appeared in your young life. It feels as if the universe brought it to you slowly, and yet, in the end, also unexpectedly in a flash. Now let's try taking a few more deep breaths. Ready? Breathe in deeply. Hold for 3, 2, 1, and then exhale. Try continuing on your own, and while doing this, try thinking to yourself, as I sit here, my whole body feels heavy and relaxed. With every exhale, I can feel gravity pulling me back towards Earth gently. I can feel my head, my shoulders, my neck becoming relaxed and at ease. And my legs are heavy and at peace with gravity's pull. Now my whole body, my legs and feet, my arms and hands, my torso, my head and neck and shoulders, my whole body is completely at peace, relaxed, and at ease. For weeks and weeks at band practice and at games, you had played right there next to each other, bumping elbows, close enough to catch quick flashes of fragrances, close enough for smiles, quick glances, silly and innocent flirtations without considering really when and where or if you might actually ever kiss. And then, unexpectedly, tonight, it just happened. while the whole gymnasium was on its feet, the whole world preoccupied with some monumental moment of a basketball game. It just happened right there in the minuscule universe between the two of you. When you think about it now, falling in love was a lot like those farmhouse lights out there in the darkness. Everything approached so slowly at first, off in the distance, hardly moving at all. And then, love gained momentum and approached you carefully and timidly, getting closer and closer, and before you knew it, before you both knew it, true love had rushed up on you in a heartbeat, irresistible and suddenly undeniable. You smile now, thinking how you had always imagined your first kiss would happen somewhere private and hidden, and yet, in the end, yours was out in the open and in front of hundreds of people who never even saw it. As your parents dial in the AM radio, you finally close your eyes and lean back.
Loss of the steamship Titanic. Report of a formal investigation into the circumstances attending the foundering on April 15, 1912, of the British steamship Titanic of Liverpool after striking ice in or near latitude 41 degrees 46 minutes north, longitude 50 degrees 14 minutes west, North Atlantic Ocean, whereby loss of life ensued. Section 4. Account of the saving and rescue of those who survived. The rescue by the steamship Carpathia. On the 15th of April, the steamship Carpathia, 13,600 tons gross of the Cunard line, Mr. Arthur Henry Rostron, master, was on her passage to Liverpool from New York. She carried some 740 passengers and 325 crew. On receipt of the Titanic's first distress message, the captain immediately ordered the ship to be turned around and driven at her highest speed, 17.5 knots, in the direction of the Titanic. He also informed the Titanic by wireless that he was coming to her assistance, and he subsequently received various messages from her. At about 2:40 a.m., he saw a green flare which, as the evidence shows, was being sent up by Mr. Boxall in number 2 boat. From this time until 4 a.m., Captain Rostron was altering his course continually in order to avoid icebergs. He fired rockets in answer to the signals he saw from Boxall's boat. At 4 o'clock, he considered he was practically up to the position given, and he stopped his ship at 4:05. He sighted the first boat, number 2, and picked her up at 4:10. There was then a large number of icebergs around him, and it was just daylight. Eventually he picked up in all 13 lifeboats, 2 emergency boats, and 2 collapsible boats, all of which were taken on board the Carpathia, the other boats being abandoned as damaged or useless. From these boats he took on board 712 persons, one of whom died shortly afterwards. The boats were scattered over an area of 4 or 5 miles, and it was 8 a.m. before they had all been picked up. He saw very little wreckage when he got near to the scene of the disaster, only a few deck chairs, cork life belts, etc., and only one body. The position was then 41 degrees 46 minutes north, 50 degrees 14 minutes west. The Carpathia subsequently returned to New York with the passengers and crew she had rescued. The court desires to record its great admiration of Captain Rostron's conduct. He did the very best that could be done. Numbers saved. The following were the numbers saved. First class. Adult males 57 out of 175, or 32.57%. Adult females 140 out of 144, or 97.22%. Male children all saved 5. Female children all saved 1. Total first class saved 203 out of 325, or 62.46%. Second class, adult males 14 out of 168, or 8.33%. Adult females 80 out of 93, or 86.02%. Male children all saved 11. Female children all saved 13. Total second class saved 118 out of 285, or 41.40%. Third class, adult males 75 out of 462, or 16.23%. Adult females 76 out of 165, or 46.06%. Male children 13 out of 48, or 27.08%. Female children 14 out of 31, or 45.16%. Total third class saved 178 out of 706, or 25.21%. Total passengers saved 499 out of 1,316, or 37.94%. Crew saved deck department 43 out of 66, or 65.15%. Engine room department 72 out of 325, or 22.15%. Victualling department, including 20 women out of 23, 97 out of 494, or 19.63%. Total crew saved 212 out of 885, or 23.95%. Total on board saved 711 out of 2,201, or 32.30%. Passengers and crew, adult males 338 out of 1,667, or 20.27%. Adult females 316 out of 425, or 74.35%. Children 57 out of 109, or 52.29%. Total passengers and crew 711 out of 2,201, or 32.30%. Section 5. The circumstances in connection with the steamship Californian. It is here necessary to consider the circumstances relating to the steamship Californian. On the 14th of April, the steamship Californian of the Leyland Line, Mr. Stanley Lordmaster, was on her passage from London, which port she left on April 5th to Boston, United States, where she subsequently arrived on April 19th. She was a vessel of 6,223 tons gross and 4,038 net. Her full speed was 12.5 to 13 knots. She had a passenger certificate, but was not carrying any passengers at the time. She belonged to the International Mercantile Marine Company, the owners of the Titanic. At 7:30 p.m. ship's time on April 14th, a wireless message was sent from this ship to the Antillean. To Captain Antillean, 6:30 p.m., apparent ship's time, latitude 42 degrees 3 minutes north, longitude 49 degrees 9 minutes west. 3 large bergs 5 miles to southward of us. Regards, Lord. The message was intercepted by the Titanic, and when the Marconi operator, Evans of the Californian, offered this ice report to the Marconi operator of the Titanic shortly after 7:30 p.m., the latter replied, "It is all right. I heard you sending it to the Antillean, and I have got it." The Californian proceeded on her course south, 89 degrees west, true until 10:20 p.m. ship's time, when she was obliged to stop and reverse engines because she was running into field ice, which stretched as far as could then be seen to the northward and southward. The master told the court that he made her position at that time to be 42 degrees 5 minutes north, 57 degrees 7 minutes west. This position is recorded in the logbook, which was written up from the scrap logbook by the chief officer. The scrap log is destroyed. It is a position about 19 miles north by east of the position of the Titanic when she foundered, and is said to have been fixed by dead reckoning and verified by observations. I am satisfied that this position is not accurate. The master twisted her head to east-northeast by the compass, and she remained approximately stationary until 5:15 a.m. on the following morning. The ship was slowly swinging around to starboard during the night. At about 11 p.m., a steamer's light was seen approaching from the eastward. The master went to Evans's room and asked what ships he had. The latter replied, "I think the Titanic is near us. I have got her." The master said, "You had better advise the Titanic we are stopped and surrounded with ice." This Evans did, calling up the Titanic and sending, "We are stopped and surrounded by ice." The Titanic replied, "Keep out." The Titanic was in communication with Cape Race, which station was then sending messages to her. The reason why the Titanic answered "Keep out" was that her Marconi operator could not hear what Cape Race was saying. As from her proximity, the message from the Californian was much stronger than any message being taken in by the Titanic from Cape Race, which was much farther off. Evans heard the Titanic continuing to communicate with Cape Race up to the time he turned in at 11:30 p.m. The master of the Californian states that when observing the approaching steamer, as she got nearer, he saw more lights, a few deck lights, and also her green side light. He considered that at 11 o'clock she was approximately 6 or 7 miles away, and at some time between 11 and 11:30 he first saw her green light. She was then about 5 miles off. He noticed that about 11:30 she stopped. In his opinion, this steamer was of about the same size as the Californian, a medium-sized steamer, something like ourselves. From the evidence of Mr. Groves, third officer of the Californian, who was the officer of the first watch, it would appear that the master was not actually on the bridge when the steamer was sighted. Mr. Groves made out 2 masthead lights. The steamer was changing her bearing slowly as she got closer, and as she approached, he went to the chart room and reported this to the master. He added, "She is evidently a passenger steamer." In fact, Mr. Groves never appears to have had any doubt on this subject. In answer to a question during his examination, "Had she much light?" he said, "Yes, a lot of light. There was absolutely no doubt of her being a passenger steamer, at least in my mind." Gill, the assistant donkey man of the Californian, who was on deck at midnight, said, referring to this steamer, "It could not have been anything but a passenger boat. She was too large." By the evidence of Mr. Groves, the master, in reply to his report, said, "Call her up on the Morse lamp and see if you can get any answer." This he proceeded to do. The master came up and joined him on the bridge and remarked, "That does not look like a passenger steamer." Mr. Groves replied, "It is, sir. When she stopped, her lights seemed to go out, and I suppose they have been put out for the night." Mr. Grove states that these lights went out at 11:40 and remembers that time because one bell was struck to call the middle watch. The master did not join him on the bridge until shortly afterwards, and consequently after the steamer had stopped. In his examination, Mr. Groves admitted that if this steamer's head was turning to port after she stopped, it might account for the diminution of lights by many of them being shut out. Her steaming lights were still visible, and also her port side light. The captain only remained upon the bridge for a few minutes. In his evidence, he stated that Mr. Groves had made no observations to him about the steamer's deck lights going out. Mr. Groves's Morse signaling appears to have been ineffectual, although at one moment he thought he was being answered, and he gave it up. He remained on the bridge until relieved by Mr. Stone, the second officer, just after midnight. In turning the Californian over to him, he pointed out the steamer and said, "She has been stopped since 11:40. She is a passenger steamer. At about the moment she stopped, she put her lights out." When Mr. Groves was in the witness box, the following questions were put to him by me. Speaking as an experienced seaman and knowing what you know now, do you think that steamer that you know was throwing up rockets, and that you say was a passenger steamer, was the Titanic? Do I think it? Yes, from what I have heard subsequently. Yes, most decidedly I do, but I do not put myself as being an experienced man. But that is your opinion as far as your experience goes? Yes, it is, my lord. Mr. Stone states that the master, who was also up, but apparently not on the bridge, pointed out the steamer to him with instructions to tell him if her bearings altered or if she got any closer. He also stated that Mr. Groves had called her up on the Morse lamp and had received no reply. Mr. Stone had with him during the middle watch an apprentice named Gibson, whose attention was first drawn to the steamer's lights at about 12:20 a.m. He could see a masthead light, her red light with glasses, and a glare of white lights on her afterdeck. He first thought her masthead light was flickering, and next thought it was a Morse light, calling us up. He replied, but could not get into communication, and finally came to the conclusion that it was, as he had first supposed, the masthead light flickering. Sometime after 12:30 a.m., Gill, the donkey man, states that he saw 2 rockets fired from the ship, which he had been observing, and about 1:10 a.m., Mr. Stone reported to the captain by voice pipe that he had seen 5 white rockets from the direction of the steamer. He states that the master answered, "Are they company's signals?" and that he replied, "I do not know, but they appear to me to be white rockets." The master told him to go on morsing, and when he received any information, to send the apprentice down to him with him. Gibson states that Mr. Stone informed him that he had reported to the master, and that the master had said the steamer was to be called up by Morse light. This witness thinks the time was 12:55. He at once proceeded again to call the steamer up by Morse. He got no reply, but the vessel fired 3 more white rockets. These rockets were also seen by Mr. Stone. Both Mr. Stone and the apprentice kept the steamer under observation, looking at her from time to time with their glasses. Between 1 o'clock and 1:40 some conversation passed between them. Mr. Stone remarked to Gibson, "Look at her now. She looks very queer out of water. Her lights look queer." He also is said by Gibson to have remarked, "A ship is not going to fire rockets at sea for nothing," and admits himself that he may possibly have used that expression. Mr. Stone states that he saw the last of the rockets fired at about 1:40, and after watching the steamer for some 20 minutes more, he sent Gibson down to the master. I told Gibson to go down to the master and be sure and wake him and tell him that altogether we had seen 8 of these white lights like white rockets in the direction of this other steamer, that this steamer was disappearing in the southwest, that we had called her up repeatedly on the Morse lamp and received no information whatsoever. Gibson states that he went down to the chart room and told the master that the master asked him if all the rockets were white and also asked him the time. Gibson stated that at this time the master was awake. It was 5 minutes past 2, and Gibson returned to the bridge to Mr. Stone and reported. They both continued to keep the ship under observation until she disappeared. Mr. Stone describes this as a gradual disappearing of all her lights, which would be perfectly natural with a ship steaming away from us. At about 2:40 a.m., Mr. Stone again called up the master by voice pipe and told him that the ship from which he had seen the rockets come had disappeared bearing southwest, 1/2 west the last he had seen of the light, and the master again asked him if he was certain there was no color in the lights. I again assured him they were all white, just white rockets. There is considerable discrepancy between the evidence of Mr. Stone and that of the master. The latter states that he went to the voice pipe at about 1:15, but was told then of a white rocket, not 5 white rockets. Moreover, between 1:30 and 4:30, when he was called by the chief officer, Mr. Stewart, he had no recollection of anything being reported to him at all, although he remembered Gibson opening and closing the chart room door. Mr. Stewart relieved Mr. Stone at 4 a.m. The latter told him he had seen a ship 4 or 5 miles off when he went on deck at 12 o'clock, and at 1 o'clock he had seen some white rockets, and that the moment the ship started firing them, she started to steam away. Just at this time, about 4 a.m., a steamer came in sight with 2 white masthead lights and a few lights amidships. He asked Mr. Stone whether he thought this was the steamer which had fired rockets, and Mr. Stone said he did not think it was. At 4:30 he called the master and informed him that Mr. Stone had told him he had seen rockets in the middle watch. The master said, "Yes, I know, he has been telling me." The master came at once onto the bridge and apparently took the fresh steamer for the one which had fired rockets and said, "She looks all right, she is not making any signals now." This mistake was not corrected. He, however, had the wireless operator call. At about 6 a.m., Captain Lord heard from the Virginian that the Titanic had struck a berg, passengers in boats, ship sinking, and he at once started through the field ice at full speed for the position given. Captain Lord stated that about 7:30 a.m. he passed the Mount Temple, stopped, and that she was in the vicinity of the position given him as where the Titanic had collided, latitude 41 degrees 46 minutes north, longitude 50 degrees 14 minutes west. He saw no wreckage there, but did later on near the Carpathia, which ship he closed soon afterwards, and he stated that the position where he subsequently left this wreckage was 41 degrees 33 minutes north, 50 degrees 1 minute west. It is said in the evidence of Mr. Stewart that the position of the Californian was verified by stellar observations at 7:30 p.m. on the Sunday evening, and that he verified the captain's position given when the ship stopped, 42 degrees 5 minutes north, 50 degrees 7 minutes west, as accurate on the next day. The position in which the wreckage was said to have been seen on the Monday morning was verified by sights taken on that morning. All the officers are stated to have taken sights, and Mr. Stewart in his evidence remarks that they all agreed. If it is admitted that these positions were correct, then it follows that the Titanic's position as given by that ship when making the CQD. Signal was approximately south 16 degrees west, true 19 miles from the Californian, and further that the position in which the Californian was stopped during the night was 30 miles away from where the wreckage was seen by her in the morning, or that the wreckage had drifted 11 miles in a little more than 5 hours. There are contradictions and inconsistencies in the story as told by the different witnesses, but the truth of the matter is plain. The Titanic collided with the berg at 11:40. The vessel seen by the Californian stopped at this time. The rockets sent up from the Titanic were distress signals. The Californian saw distress signals. The number sent up by the Titanic was about 8. The Californian saw 8. The time over which the rockets from the Titanic were sent up was from about 12:45 to 1:45 o'clock. It was about this time that the Californian saw the rockets. At 2:40, Mr. Stone called to the master that the ship from which he had seen the rockets had disappeared. At 2:20 a.m., the Titanic had foundered. It was suggested that the rockets seen by the Californian were from some other ship, not the Titanic, but no other ship to fit this theory has ever been heard of. These circumstances convince me that the ship seen by the Californian was the Titanic, and if so, according to Captain Lord, the two vessels were about 5 miles apart at the time of the disaster. The evidence from the Titanic corroborates this estimate, but I'm advised that the distance was probably greater, though not more than 8 to 10 miles. The ice by which the Californian was surrounded was loose ice extending for a distance of not more than 2 or 3 miles in the direction of the Titanic. The night was clear and the sea was smooth. When she first saw the rockets, the Californian could have pushed through the ice to the open water without any serious risk, and so have come to the assistance of the Titanic. Had she done so, she might have saved many, if not all, of the lives that were lost. Section 6. The Board of Trade's Administration. The court was invited by the Board of Trade to report upon the rules and regulations made under the Merchant Shipping Acts 1894 to 1906 and the administration of those acts and of such rules and regulations so far as the consideration thereof is material to this casualty. Number 26 of the questions submitted to the court by the Board of Trade. Charges were made against the Board of Trade during the progress of the inquiry of a twofold kind. First, it was said that the board had been negligent in that they had failed to keep up to date their rules and regulations relating generally to the provision of life-saving appliances at sea. And secondly, it was said that their officials had, in the particular instance of the Titanic, failed to exercise due care in the supervision of the vessel's plans and the inspection of the work done upon her. With reference to the first of these charges, it was reduced in the course of the inquiry to a charge of neglect to keep the board's scale for the provision of lifeboat accommodation up to date. The circumstances are these. In March 1886, the board appointed a departmental committee consisting of 3 of their principal officers to inquire into the question of boats, rafts, and life-saving apparatus carried by seagoing merchant ships. In their report, this committee pointed out that as regards boats for ocean-going steamers carrying large numbers of passengers, the boats would be of little use in saving life, although they might for a time prolong its existence, unless succor were at hand from other ships or from proximity to shore. and speaking with special reference to passenger steam vessels carrying emigrants across the Atlantic to ports on the east coast of North America, they said as follows: "Considering the number of vessels employed in this trade and the large number of passengers they carry, and also taking into consideration the stormy character of the ocean they have to cross and the thick and foggy weather encountered, we think this class is the most important of any, and we cannot pass over the fact that of late years this traffic has been carried on with remarkable immunity from loss of life. The boat accommodation these vessels are forced to carry when sailing with emigrants is regulated by the scale in the Passengers Act, 1855, which provides for boat accommodation for 216 people as a maximum, so that, supposing a vessel leaves with 1,000 passengers and 200 crew under the present statutory requirements, she need only carry sufficient boat accommodation for 216 of these people. Thus it will be seen that the boats carried by this class of vessels are also quite inadequate as an effectual means of saving life should a disaster happen to a ship with her full complement of passengers on board. We are glad to be able to say that there are many liberal and careful ship owners who do all in their power to provide for the safety of their passengers by equipping their vessels with boats far in excess of the number required by statute. But at the same time, there are others carrying large numbers of emigrants who do no more than they are required to do by law. We have gone into this question with reference to this class of vessels very fully, and have visited many of them, and we think that the boats required by Act should be increased 100%, and in addition to them that the owners should be induced to carry sufficient collapsible boats and approved rafts, so that each ship shall have sufficient life-saving gear for all on board at any one time, provided, as said before, that no ship need carry more boat accommodation than is sufficient for all on board at that time. In 1887, a select committee of the House of Commons, of which Lord Charles Beresford was the chairman, was appointed to report on saving life at sea, and they found in their report that many passenger ships could not, without great inconvenience, carry so many of the ordinary wooden boats as would suffice to carry the whole of the passengers and crew with safety in bad weather. Under such circumstances, the crew would not be sufficient to man so many boats, nor could they all be got into the water in sufficient time in the event of very rapid foundering. Having regard, however, to the fact that accidents occur probably as often in moderate weather as in bad, and having regard also to the fact that the very cause of the accident frequently incapacitates many of the boats, and to the further fact that an insufficiency of boats undoubtedly tends to cause panic, we are of opinion that all seagoing passenger ships should be compelled by law to carry such boats and other life-saving apparatus as would in the aggregate best provide for the safety of all on board in moderate weather. As a result of these reports, the Merchant Shipping Life-Saving Appliances Act 1888 appears to have been passed, under which rules were made by the Board of Trade at different dates. The Merchant Shipping Act 1894 repealed the Act of 1888 and substituted therefore sections 427 to 431 and the 17th schedule of the new Act. Under this Act, 1894, a table showing the minimum number of boats to be placed under davits and their minimum cubic contents was issued by the Board. It was dated March 9, 1894, and came into operation on June 1st of that year. This table was based on the gross tonnage of the vessels to which it was to apply, and not upon the numbers carried, and it provided that the number of boats and their capacity should increase as the tonnage increased. The table, however, stopped short at the point where the gross tonnage of the vessels reached 10,000 and upwards. As to all such vessels, whatever their size might be, the minimum number of boats under davits was fixed by the table at 16, with a total minimum capacity of 5,500 cubic feet. But as regarded emigrant steamships, there was a rule which provided that if the boats under davits required by the table did not furnish sufficient accommodation for all on board, then additional boats of approved description, whether under davits or not, or approved life rafts should be carried, and that these additional boats or rafts should be of at least such carrying capacity that they and the boats required by the table should provide together in vessels of 5,000 tons and upwards 3/4 more than the minimum cubic contents required by the table, so that in the case of an emigrant ship such as the Titanic, the requirements under the rules and table together exacted a provision of 9,625 cubic feet of lifeboat and raft accommodation, 5,500 feet in boats under davits with 3/4, namely 4,125 added. Taken at 10 cubic feet per person, this would be equivalent to a provision for 962 persons. No doubt at the time these rules were made and this table was drawn up, it was thought that, having regard to the size of vessels then built and building, it was unnecessary to carry the table further. The largest emigrant steamer then afloat was the Lucania, of 12,952 tons. In the report of the Select Committee of the House of Commons, a reference to watertight bulkheads had been made, which was in the following terms. Though the question of construction was clearly not included in the reference to the committee, still they think it only right to state, after having heard the evidence, that the proper placing of bulkheads, so as to enable a ship to keep afloat for some length of time after an accident has occurred, is most important for saving life at sea, and a thing upon which the full efficiency of life-saving appliances largely depends. This passage probably explains the insertion in the Board of Trade's rules for life-saving appliances of Rule Number 12, which is as follows: watertight compartments. When ships of any class are divided into efficient watertight compartments to the satisfaction of the Board of Trade, they shall only be required to carry additional boats, rafts, and buoyant apparatus of 1/2 of the capacity required by these rules. But the exemption shall not extend to life jackets or similar approved articles of equal buoyancy suitable to be worn on the person. If this rule had become applicable to the Titanic, then the total cubical lifeboat or raft accommodation which she would have been required to carry would not have been more than 7,562, equivalent to accommodation for 756 persons. It did not, however, become applicable for the owners, never required the Board of Trade to express any opinion under the rule as to the efficiency of the watertight compartments. The Titanic, in fact, carried boat accommodation for 1,178 persons, a number far in excess of the requirements of the table and rules, and therefore no concession under Rule 12 was needed. Speaking generally, recourse to this Rule 12 by ship owners has been so insignificant that the rule itself may be regarded as of no practical account. The foregoing rules with the table were laid before Parliament in the usual way, and so received the required statutory sanction. After 1894 steamers were built of a much larger tonnage than 10,000, the increase culminating in the Titanic, with a gross tonnage of 46,328. As the vessels built increased in size, one would have thought the necessity for increased lifeboat accommodation would grow, but the rules and table remained stationary, and nothing was done to them by way of change. The explanation of this long delay from 1894 to 1912 was given before me by Sir Alfred Chalmers, who had served under the Board of Trade as nautical advisor from 1896 to August 1911. He is now retired. I think it will be well if I give his explanation in his own words. He says, "I considered the matter very closely from time to time. I first of all considered the record of the trade, that is to say, the record of the casualties, and to see what immunity from loss there was. I found it was the safest mode of travel in the world, and I thought it was neither right nor the duty of a State Department to impose regulations upon that mode of travel as long as the record was a clean one. Secondly, I found that as ships grew bigger, there were such improvements made in their construction that they were stronger and better ships, both from the point of view of watertight compartments and also absolute strength. And I considered that that was the road along which the ship owners were going to travel, and that they should not be interfered with. I then went to the maximum that is down in the table, 16 boats and upward, together with the supplementary boats, and I considered from my experience that that was the maximum number that could be rapidly dealt with at sea and that could be safely housed without encumbering the vessel's decks unduly. In the next place, I considered that the traffic was very safe on account of the routes, the definite routes being agreed upon by the different companies, which tended to lessen the risk of collision and to avoid ice and fog. Then again, there was the question of wireless telegraphy, which had already come into force on board of these passenger ships. I was seized of the fact that in July 1901, the Lucania had been fitted with wireless telegraphy, and the Cunard Line generally fitted it during that year to all their ships. The Allen Line fitted it in 1902, and I am not sure that in 1904 it had not become quite general on the transatlantic ships. That, of course, entered into my consideration as well. Then another point was the manning. It was quite evident to me that if you went on crowding the ships with boats, you would require a crew which were not required otherwise for the safe navigation of the ship or for the proper upkeep of the ship, but you are providing a crew which would be carried uselessly across the ocean, that never would be required to man the boats. Then the last point, and not the least, was this, that the voluntary action of the owners was carrying them beyond the requirements of our scale. And when voluntary action on the part of ship owners is doing that, I think that any State Department should hold its hand before it steps in to make a hard and fast scale for that particular type of shipping. I considered that that scale fitted all sizes of ships that were then afloat, and I did not consider it necessary to increase it, and that was my advice to Sir Walter Howell. I appreciate this explanation, and I think there is much force in it. At the same time, it seems to me that it does not justify the delay. Even taking all these matters into consideration, it cannot be that the provision for boat accommodation made in 1894 for vessels of 10,000 tons and upward remained sufficient to 1910, when vessels of 45,000 tons were being built. Two considerations demonstrate this. The first is that some ship owners recognized the insufficiency of the requirements of the Board of Trade and voluntarily exceeded those requirements by providing larger boat accommodation than the old rules and table exacted. The second is that shortly before Sir Alfred Chalmers left the Board of Trade, the board had begun to direct attention to the amending of their rules in this connection. It appears that in November 1910, a question was asked in the House of Commons as to whether the attention of the President of the Board of Trade had been called to the fact that the Olympic, a sister ship of the Titanic, was provided with 14 lifeboats only. The answer given was that the Olympic, which was then in course of construction, would carry 14 lifeboats and 2 ordinary boats of an aggregate capacity of 9,752 cubic feet, which was in excess of the requirements of the statutory rules. On February 15, 1911, a further question was asked as to the date of the last regulations, and whether, having regard to the increased tonnage of modern ships, the desirability of revising the regulations would be considered by the Board of Trade. The answer by the President was, those regulations were last revised in 1894. The question of their further revision is engaging the serious attention of the Board of Trade, and I have decided to refer the matter to the Merchant Shipping Advisory Committee for consideration and advice. 3 days afterwards, namely on February 18, 1911, a circular letter was sent out by the Board of Trade to the Board's principal officers at Liverpool, London, and Glasgow, asking each of those gentlemen to draft such an extension of the existing boat scale as he might think satisfactory and reasonable for the conditions of large passenger steamers. This circular letter was answered by the principal officer in Glasgow, Mr. Harris, on February 24, 1911, by the principal officer in London, Mr. Park, on February 27, 1911, and by the principal officer in Liverpool, Mr. Young, on March 3, 1911. It is sufficient to say of these answers that they all suggested a large extension of the statutory requirements. Meanwhile, namely on February 28, 1911, Mr. Archer, the Board of Trade's principal ship surveyor, had also drawn up a scale. This was a more exacting scale than that of any of the 3 principal officers. By his scale, a vessel of the tonnage of the Titanic would have had to carry boat accommodation equivalent to at least 24,937 cubic feet, which would have been sufficient to hold all and more than all the persons who were on board at the time of the disaster, 2,201. It would not, however, have been nearly sufficient to have held all that the vessel might lawfully have carried, 3,547, and it is to be observed with reference to Mr. Archer's scale that in it he suggests an extension of Rule 12, by which, if the vessel were divided into efficient watertight compartments, the total boat accommodation might be reduced much more than Rule 12 as it stands would permit. If this reduction be taken into account, the boat accommodation would fall so that it would be sufficient only for 1,750 persons. Mr. Archer's view was that ship owners should be encouraged to increase the floatability of the ships they built, and that the way to encourage them was to relax the legal requirements as to boats as their plans advanced in that direction. The great object was so to build the ship that in the event of a disaster she would be her own lifeboat. Having obtained these 4 reports, the Board of Trade on April 4, 1911, submitted the matter to their advisory committee and obtained the committee's report on July 4, 1911. The following are copies, with omissions of immaterial passages, of the Board of Trade's letter of April 4, 1911, and of the Advisory Committee's report of July 4, 1911. Board of Trade, Marine Department, 7 Whitehall Gardens, London, Southwest, April 4th, 1911. Sir, I am directed by the Board of Trade to enclose herewith, for the information of the Merchant Shipping Advisory Committee, a copy of a question asked in the House of Commons on February 15th, and of the answer given by the President of the Board of Trade, with reference to the life-saving appliances rules made under Section 427 of the Merchant Shipping Act, 1894. The Board are of opinion that the table in the appendix to the rules should be extended upward in the form indicated in the accompanying scale, so as to provide for vessels of tonnage up to 50,000 tons gross and upward. It appears to the Board that the number of boats and the boat capacity need not necessarily increase in a regular proportion according to the increase in tonnage, and that due regard should be paid to what is reasonable and practical in passenger steamers exceeding 10,000 tons. I am to state that the Board would be obliged if the Merchant Shipping Advisory Committee would be so good as to suggest in what manner the scales, see accompanying copy, should be continued upward, having due regard to the considerations indicated above. I am further to state that the Board would be glad to learn whether the Advisory Committee are of opinion that Rule 12 should or should not be revised so as to exempt altogether from the requirement of additional boats or rafts those vessels which are divided into efficient, watertight compartments to the satisfaction of the Board of Trade. I am, etc., Walter J. Howell. The Secretary, Merchant Shipping Advisory Committee, Merchant Shipping Advisory Committee, July 4th, 1911. Sir, we have the honor to report that your letter of April 4th, with reference to the minimum number of lifeboats to be earned on vessels of 10,000 tons, gross tonnage and upward, and your letter of May 17th on the subject of the depth of lifeboats, have been very carefully considered by the Merchant Shipping Advisory Committee, and that it was unanimously decided at a meeting held on the 29th ultimo to adopt the report of a subcommittee which was specially appointed to inquire into these questions. A copy of the report is accordingly forwarded herewith, and the committee desire us to suggest for the consideration of the Board of Trade that effect should be given to the recommendations contained in it. We are, etc., Norman Hill, Chairman, R.W. Matthew, Secretary, Sir Walter J. Howell, Assistant Secretary, Marine Department, Board of Trade. Report of the Life-Saving Appliances Subcommittee to the Merchant Shipping Advisory Committee. In accordance with the decision of the Merchant Shipping Advisory Committee, at their meeting on Friday, April 28th, we have given careful consideration to the latter of April 4th from the Board of Trade, in which the committee were asked to advise. 1. As to the manner in which the table in the appendix to the life-saving appliances rules should be extended so as to provide for vessels of tonnage up to 50,000 tons gross and upward, and 2. As to whether Rule 12 should or should not be revised, so as to exempt altogether from the requirement of additional boats and or rafts those vessels which are divided into efficient, watertight compartments to the satisfaction of the Board of Trade. In considering these questions, we have had specially in mind the fact that the number of passengers carried does not necessarily increase in proportion to the increase in the tonnage of the vessel. This is particularly true in the case of vessels exceeding 10,000 tons, a type of vessel which is practically only built to provide special accommodation for large numbers of first and second class passengers. Similarly, there is no fixed relation between the tonnage of vessels and the deck space available for the carrying of lifeboats under davits. Increase in the length of a vessel is only one of the factors, and often not the most material factor contributing to the increase in its tonnage. And it should also be remembered in estimating the space available for the launching of lifeboats that it is impossible to place davits forward of the bridge and very undesirable to have them on the quarters of the vessel. We are strongly of opinion that every encouragement should be given to secure the provision of vessels which by their construction have been rendered as unsinkable as possible, and which are provided with efficient means for communicating with the shore or with other vessels in case of disaster. In view of these considerations, we have agreed upon the following recommendations. 1. That it is questionable whether it is practical to increase the number of davits. 2. That any increase in the number of lifeboats to be carried can probably be best effected by providing for the launching of further boats from the existing davits. 3. That the table should be extended in the manner indicated below. It is further recommended that all passenger vessels of 10,000 tons gross tonnage and upward should be required to be fitted with wireless telegraphy apparatus. 4. That the rules should be amended so as to admit of decked lifeboats of an approved type being stowed on top of one another or under an open lifeboat, subject to suitable arrangements being made for launching promptly the boats so stowed. 5. That the additional boats and rafts required under the provisions of Division A, Class 1D of the Life-Saving Appliances Rules shall be of at least such carrying capacity that they, and the boats required by columns 2 and 3 of the above table, provide together 3/4 more than the minimum cubic contents required by column 4 of that table. 6. That vessels divided into efficient watertight compartments to the satisfaction of the Board of Trade should, provided they are fitted with wireless telegraphy apparatus, be exempt from the requirement of additional boats and/or rafts. The committee suggests in this connection that the Board of Trade should review the requirements designed to attain the standards as to watertight compartments at present enforced by them under Rule 12, having regard to the developments of shipbuilding since the report of the committee on the spacing and construction of watertight bulkheads. We have also had before us the Board's further letter of May 17th, inquiring whether, in the opinion of the Advisory Committee, it would be advisable to prescribe a maximum depth for lifeboats as compared with their breadth, and, if so, what that proportion should be. In connection with this letter, we have been supplied by the Board of Trade with reports from their principal officers in Great Britain, giving the dimensions and cubic capacities of the various kinds of boats on 5 typical ships in each of 8 ports. We recommend that the Board should be advised to alter the life-saving appliances rules so as to provide that, in future, the depth of lifeboats supplied to a British merchant vessel shall not exceed 44% of their breadth. Norman Hill, S. Cross, George N. Hampson, T. Royden, Thomas Spencer, M. Carlyle, William Theodore Doxford, Robert A. Ogilvy, T. Rome, J. Havelock Wilson. It will be observed that if effect had been given by the Board of Trade to the report of the Advisory Committee, the requirements for a vessel of the size of the Titanic would have reached 14,525 cubic feet, 8,300 plus 3/4 of 8,300, namely 6,225, with, however, this qualification that if the vessel were divided into efficient, watertight compartments, as she probably was, and fitted with wireless telegraphy, as she certainly was, a provision of a boat capacity of 8,300 cubic feet, equivalent to space for 830 persons, would have been legally sufficient. This would have been much less than the accommodation with which the Titanic, when she put to sea, was in fact provided, namely for 1,178 persons. Effect, however, was not given to the report. A question arose with reference to the dimensions of lifeboats, and it was thought better to get that question settled before proceeding to revise the rules. The examination of this question involved making several experiments which caused delay, and it was not until April 16, 1912, that a reply was sent by the Board of Trade to the Advisory Committee. It will be noticed that the date of this reply is just after the disaster to the Titanic became known. I am, however, quite satisfied that instructions for the preparation of this letter had been given in the offices of the Board of Trade some days before the 16th, and that the letter was not sent in consequence of the disaster. It is desirable to set it out. Board of Trade, Marine Department, 7 Whitehall Gardens, London, Southwest, April 16, 1912. Sir, with reference to your letter of the 4th of July last respecting certain questions raised in connection with the proposed revision of the life-saving appliances rules, I am directed by the Board of Trade to state, for the information of the Advisory Committee, that they have given very careful consideration to the report of the Life-Saving Appliances Subcommittee, which was forwarded with your letter. As regards the recommendations with reference to the proposed extension of the table, appendix to the Life-Saving Appliances rules, showing the minimum number of boats to be placed under davits, the Board are glad to observe that the Committee agree that alterations and additions are now necessary to meet the changed conditions due to recent developments in the size of passenger steamships and in the number of persons which these vessels can accommodate. The Board of Trade note that the gradations of tonnage in the extension of the scale suggested by the Advisory Committee are not the same as those in the form of scales submitted to them by the Board, while the increase in the number of boats is not in the number to be placed under davits, but in the number of additional boats required to be readily available for attachments to davits. It is observed that the Committee hold the view that it is questionable whether it is practical to increase the number of davits, and that any increase in the number of lifeboats to be carried can probably be best effected by providing for the launching of further boats from the existing davits. The Board presume that in arriving at these conclusions, the Committee have had regard to ships already built rather than to new ships, as they see no reason why there would be any difficulty in having more than 8 pairs of davits on each side of the ship, provided that the requirements of life-saving appliances rules were known before the plans were prepared. The Board are of opinion that a very careful and thorough revision of the table should now be made, and I am to transmit herewith a copy of a memorandum and tables prepared by the professional advisor to the Marine Department containing a full and considered opinion on the subject of the extension of the boat scale and cognate questions. As regards the proposed amendment of the rules so as to admit of decked lifeboats of an approved type being stowed one above another or under an open lifeboat, I am to state that this question is now under consideration, and a communication will be addressed to you shortly on the subject. With reference to the Advisory Committee's recommendation regarding the amendment of Rule 12 of the General Rules, the Board desire me to state that the questions raised in the recommendation are of wide application and of such importance that the Board do not think that they can be adequately considered except by a committee of equal standing to the committee which reported in 1891 on the spacing and construction of watertight bulkheads in the mercantile marine. The board have the question of the appointment of a committee under consideration. In connection with the advisory committee's recommendation that the depth of lifeboats shall not exceed 44% of their breadth, I am to transmit herewith, for their consideration, a draft amendment of Rules Numbers 1, 2, and 3 of the General Rules with reference to the construction of ships' boats. The board have made full inquiry into the question of the construction of ships' boats and obtained some useful information as to the average depth of boat which is deemed desirable for safety and utility, and the ratio of that depth to the breadth. And they attach so much importance to this element of boat construction that they think it should receive the careful attention of the committee. The board think that the committee, in the light of this additional information, may reconsider the opinions expressed on this point in their letter of July 4th. I am therefore to transmit herewith copies of memoranda by the professional advisor to the Marine Department and the acting principal ship surveyor. The board desire me to state that they would be glad to be furnished with the advisory committee's views as to the application of the proposed new rules and boat scale, for example, whether they should apply to ships already built, and if so, to what extent. They regard it as of great importance, on the one hand, that all British vessels should be provided with a proper and sufficient equipment of life-saving appliances, and on the other, that regulation should not be enforced without notice, which would necessitate important structural alterations and consequent heavy expense in vessels already built. I am to add that in order to make the constitution of the committee, when considering this question, agree with that of the Statutory Life-Saving Appliances Committee indicated in the 17th Schedule to the Merchant Shipping Act, 1894, the board have followed the course adopted on previous occasions and have invited Lloyd's Register of British and Foreign Shipping and the Institute of London Underwriters to select a representative who will be available to sit on the advisory committee when the question is under consideration. I am, etc., Walter J. Howell. The Secretary, Merchant Shipping Advisory Committee, 7, Whitehall Gardens, Southwest.